We are Rogue Media Sports.
A lot can happen between falling in love with a house online and owning it. Between imagining living there and breathing in your new home for the first time. Having an advocate who can help you navigate the complex world of financing, inspections, negotiating, analyzing the market, and talking through any anxieties that may pop up, that can make all the difference. That's what the expertise of a Realtor can do for you. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors and bound by a code of ethics, because that's who we are.
You haven't heard about the McCrispy yet? Well, then, you probably haven't heard the sweet silence after the first crispy bite either. Go try it for yourself to hear the best nut sound you've ever heard.
Oh, so good to be back with you. It is Matt Mosley alongside Ed Werder. We are Frito Nation Productions right here in the studio after a bit of a hiatus.
I'm just waking up from this hiatus.
Love a good hiatus, hibernation, if you will. We after the Cowboys with a wonderful 6-0 victory over the Super Bowl champion Eagles. We didn't know it at the time, but Super Bowl Eagles and their head coach, Doug Peterson, one of our original guests. I would say he was probably in the first, month or so, maybe the first 5 episodes of the Doomsday Podcast. Thank you for everybody who has been asking Ed Werder on Twitter. Ed's a little bit more active than I am on Twitter.
Or in every other regard.
At Ed Werder RFA.
A little more active than you in everything.
At Matt Mosley is how you can follow me, and we are proud to be back. We know some of you guys were reaching out. When are you guys coming back? Hey, now's a good time to come back, and of course we got the draft coming up right here from Dallas. We'll be in the middle of it. Ed, I haven't even told you this, and Ed is freshly back to us from Orlando, Florida, where he's been at the owners' meetings.
I'm working on my expense report right now.
I'm a little worried about that. Stephen Jones interview coming up, and an exclusive. Other folks kind of gathered around and talked to Stephen. Ed shows up, and Stephen says, yeah, we'll go one-on-one with you, Ed. And so we appreciate that about Ed, and we will have that for you. And, Ed, I wanted to say, we have been offered, I don't know if you want to do this with me or not, we've been offered the use of a suite to do our show at the Cowboys' first night of the draft. It has been offered to us, and I just wanted to... one of the, let's just call him, I don't know if he wants to be mentioned, let's call him a Doomsday benefactor. Just a man who admires the Doomsday. Let's call him Mark, okay? And that is his name, that's his first name, and I think he'd be good with me stopping right there. But we could do the draft right there. And,
that's a very generous offer.
Ed, since you left, I don't even know. I took a radio gig, and I'll tell you more about that. In fact, I want you to cut a little something with me after we're done here. So, yeah. And that's
I'll
right.
invoice you for that, too.
Certainly want you guys to do that for free. Ed, but you're back from Orlando.
Yeah.
Quickest, and we'll get to that interview here in a minute. Quickly, what was your biggest takeaway? Was it all the rules changes that came down? Was it any of the interviews that you did? I've been to these things. They're usually at these posh hotels. I'm sure this was no exception. What was the atmosphere like, and what was your biggest takeaway from having spent a couple of days, spent at least the weekend, and just flown in from the owners' meetings?
It was at a Ritz-Carlton and a JW Marriott in Orlando. It was not as eventful as an owners' meeting Rick Goslin and I covered in Orlando 25 years ago when it began the Jimmy Jerry breakup of all breakups. Wasn't that eventful, but it was great to get to talk to, we had a coach's breakfast, and I sat down with Jason Garrett and Doug Peterson, the Super Bowl winning coach you mentioned, walked by, flashed his Super Bowl ring and said, "Oh, I notice who you're starting with." So that sounded a bit ominous. Because I think Doug is still far more likely to appear on the Doomsday Podcast than Jason Garrett is likely ever to agree to any of our requests should we make one.
Do you think Jason would know how to download, let's not make it about us, just any podcast? Do you think Jason Garrett has ever downloaded a podcast?
I don't know, but he's a pretty smart guy, having that Ivy League education, and I'm sure if he wants to hear something, he has people who can make that happen for him.
Okay.
And I would also say that my going to the owners' meeting was kind of an impulsive decision. I just felt Like, I wanted to be around these people. I wanted access. I wanted to gather some new information to bring to people on this podcast about the Cowboys and about the rest of the league. And there's no better place to accomplish it than that. And so I'm thankful that the NFL credentialed me. It was a little awkward going there because I was uninvited and I'm paying my own expenses. And I kind of felt like Johnny Manziel at somebody else's pro day.
It's been happening a lot.
Yeah, so that was kind of weird, but cooperation was incredible.
I hope you put the Doomsday Podcast on your credentials. I mean, there's no need for you to go in there feeling like you're not a part of something, Ed. I mean, you need to represent when we send you out into the world.
I don't know where the NFL stands exactly on credentialing for podcasts, so I went under the disguise of Westwood One, which I've worked for, and they've asked me to cover the draft, and that's in the works. So we'll see if we can get some cooperation on that. But
submit some expenses to Westwood One on this trip.
Let's see what they get out of it. If the Doomsday Podcast gets more out of it, then I'll expense you. Anyway, so you asked me my biggest takeaway. We're going to get into this. We're going to listen to this Stephen Jones interview. And remember, he's on the competition committee, so he was involved in voting and creating these new rule changes that were, in some cases, approved by NFL owners, including the Dez catch, no catch question. But my big takeaway was just what a compelling interview it was, because he was so insightful. I mean, he gave me insight into some of the issues in the passing game that I don't think have been previously exposed. And you get a very clear sense, I think, in listening to him about how unsatisfied they are with what the coaching staff has gotten out of the football team that they've had, and that no longer will there be excuses tolerated in terms of Jason Garrett just winning as many games as he can, depending each year on suspensions and injuries. So I think people have a lot to look forward to.
Yeah, I think that is the truth, and I think that's why, without further ado, Frito, if you will hit the music, sir. It is time. We alluded to it. Ed Werder was able to go to Orlando and then was able to spend some one-on-one time. We call these exclusives in the business, and sit down with the executive vice president, player personnel, the heir to the throne, Stephen Jones. Take it away, Ed.
Well, this is Stephen Jones' second exclusive interview with the Doomsday Podcast, and he made some news the last time we interviewed him with some revelations about Ezekiel Elliott and his playing weight and so forth, and his conditioning as he began his suspension. And on this particular day, he and I sat outside a beautiful sunny day. We shared a wooden bench, and he offered many opinions and a lot of insight, not only into Cowboys issues, as I mentioned, but also some of the new NFL rules created by the competition committee, of which he's a member. We started what became a 17-minute conversation with a review of the new catch rule, inspired in part by the Dez Bryant no catch in Green Bay in a playoff game 3 years ago. And that play was viewed countless times by members of the committee, each time, no doubt, a painful reminder for Stephen Jones.
I don't know how much that would have changed things, but I sure would have liked to have seen it. But, to me, the bigger thing is I think we've done the right move here for our fans. And, I think people know a catch when they see it. Our officials, obviously, the officials called that one a catch. They called these other ones that are debatable. The Pittsburgh Jesse James play, the Calvin Johnson, all these are catches that are being called, and I think our officials know a catch when they see it. I think our fans know one, and I think it was a great exercise. I applaud our commissioner, for really challenging the group, and then I think the mechanics of how we went through it with Rich McKay and our coaching staff and Troy Benson, and really going through and saying, hey, what do we want to be a catch, and then writing the rules accordingly. And I think we came out in a great place. It was obviously passed unanimously, and I just think it's something that our fans will understand better, and there won't be all the consternation that comes with, what's been happening over the past 4 or 5 years in terms of, people being confused about what a catch might be. Obviously, in the Super Bowl, there was lots of debate. I think we came down in great places on both of those catches.
It seemed like they were using the rules that were soon to be enacted.
Yes, and I think people felt good about those. So anyway, at the end of the day, it's a long-winded way of saying I think we're in a great place with that particular play, and I think everybody's pleased with it.
The other big change, I think, is that now the officials in New York can determine whether a player should be ejected or not for egregious conduct that maybe the game officials don't see.
Well, a lot of times in the heat of the action, sometimes the officials miss something. I mean, they don't see it. They're turned around. Something that seems obvious to our fans at home. How in the world is that guy staying in a game? We had a couple of plays last year where that was the case, and we felt really compelled to fix it. But certainly our fans don't want to see, dead ball plays where, they're just plays we don't want in our game.
The Rob Gronkowski,
Gronkowski, the Mike Evans play. I mean, that's just not what we want in our game. I think both players, all the players ultimately, weren't pleased with the way they acted, and I think those are plays that we do need to catch. Those dead ball plays where sometimes the official may have just not seen everything, and I think we can get this right too. I think it can be done in a good way where there's not going to be any controversy.
You've got a star on your lapel. You're wearing a sharp-looking blue jacket. So let's talk about the team that represents those colors so often on Sundays and Mondays. What do you think the Cowboys have accomplished to this point with the free agent signings that you've made on the offensive line and at wide receiver?
I do think our goal usually is in free agency is to fill our needs so that we can really draft in a way that we've been able to have success, which is draft the best player available. And obviously we had some needs we felt like, losing Wilbur and Hitchens, that we at least needed to get a linebacker on campus, if you will. We needed to certainly help our receiver spot. As I kind of leaked out the other day, Terrence has had a little setback in his offseason, his foot, but feel good. He's obviously a guy who doesn't miss, and he feels good. We feel good that he'll be back for the season, but at the same time, he certainly had that part of it, and we felt like we needed a couple of receivers to really bring some competition to that position. And we've got a new receivers coach there, and we felt compelled to help that area. And then, of course, the offensive line, we signed one of our own and two new ones, and really wanted to not only have some depth there, but hopefully find a starter type there in Fleming, and we'll get the best 5 guys out there, and then we can move forward now in the draft and take who's the best player available when it comes up. Obviously, it doesn't prevent us from drafting in these areas that we still feel like we can use some more help, but at the same time we feel like we've done enough at those positions to help us. I know at the end of the day sometimes our fans wish we'd do more in free agency. At the end of the day our vision still is on free agency is it's a fallback if you don't draft well, and to some degree you're in the penalty box because I still feel you overpay for a lot of these players early on in free agency, and I still believe good players get paid like they're great, average ones get paid like they're good, and so on and so forth. But I think we found value in this free agency. I think we found good players that can really help us this year. I know, Will, myself, Jerry, Jason, we weren't pleased with the free agent, how we performed in free agency last year. We were certainly trying to be efficient, but, I don't think we ended up finding the players that ultimately helped us. I think hopefully this year we'll change that, and we'll have some players here that can step in and make a difference for us next season to go along with these 10 draft picks we're going to have going into the draft this year. You
got some flexibility among the offensive line when you sign. Is one of your goals to try to move Lael Collins from right tackle back to left guard?
That hadn't been determined. Flexibility. You
said best 5 you want.
Flexibility is a wonderful thing, and Lael gives us that. He's shown he can play guard at a high level. He's shown he can play tackle at a high level. Fleming's played guard and tackle. But we're going to see what everybody does the best. It gives us the best opportunity to have success with the 5 best guys out there. And I know, Jason and, his offensive staff will determine that. And we'll go through these, the off-season, the mini camps, the OTAs, explore that, and, drill down, hopefully be in a position maybe going into camp to have everybody settled in and see how it works. But we do feel good that we've made ourselves better in the offensive line.
And what about wide receiver? Obviously, there's going to be a lot more competition at those positions, assuming Terrence Williams is healthy again. What does Allen Hurns' addition mean to the future of Dez Bryant?
Yeah, I don't think it has any effect. Certainly, Dez Bryant still, we have to sit down with Dez. That time will come,
to address
it's appropriate,
his
and we'll address whatever, we need to address with Dez. But at this time, I think Hurns certainly really brings a great, in our mind, a competitive player that plays the game the right way. He does whatever's asked of him. He does it at a high level, and we really think we've improved there. At the same time, Thompson brings us a speed element that we felt like we were missing in terms of taking the top off and, keeping people honest in the back end. Not only helps our shorter routes, but it also helps your run game when people are worried somebody's going to run by you. So, I think it's going to make for a competitive situation when we look at the 6 guys who made our team, and then you throw Hurns and Thompson in there. It's a good situation, and we may not be done yet. I mean, I think competition on the roster, Jason's a huge believer in it. You want competition. You don't want everybody feeling like, hey, I've got this thing, I've got this team made. And I think that makes you better. And I think, free agency's allowed us to do that. And as I said, we've got 10 really good, 10 draft picks coming up. And, we've really done a good job as of late making draft picks. And I think we'll do another good job with it. I know Will and the scouts are prepared and ready to get Jerry and myself and the coaching staff all up to speed, and feel like we've got a chance to have a great draft.
When you say you may not be done yet, I assume you mean at the wide receiver position. Does that mean that you don't preclude the possibility of taking a receiver with the 19th pick, should you deem that player the best available and the best fit?
I mean, that's the goal at the end of the day is, whoever's the best player on our board, we'd like to take that player. And if it's a receiver, it's a receiver. If it's if it's a defensive lineman, it's a defensive lineman. We'll just see who's sitting there. And certainly, that's the goal in free agency is get yourself where you don't really feel compelled to take a knee.
Jason was saying this morning that there's a real emphasis on improving the passing game this year, that it wasn't what this team has had in the past 10 years. Mm-hmm. In what ways do you think Dak plays a part in that as he goes into year 3 as a starting quarterback?
Well, I think he's the key. At the end of the day, he's a big part of it. And it all starts with him. He's the trigger guy. And, I think we can do some things to help him more. I think Dak's a guy that's a little different than Tony, probably more like Troy in terms of the passing game. He wants, precise routes. He wants to throw the ball, on time to areas. And whereas Tony would improvise a little more, not that Dak can't improvise, but, I think Dak is a little more disciplined in terms of wanting the receivers to be good route runners and be where they're supposed to be, those type of things. And now, at the same time, does he need to work on being able to improvise a little more? Of course, and he's good at that, obviously. He's amazing with his feet. He's a mobile quarterback, and he can make plays on the run, but I think we also can help him in terms of, what Sanjay's going to do with our receivers and really holding our receivers accountable to, running precise routes and, making the plays they need to make.
Do you think it gets lost on people who, first of all, in Dallas have high regard for what Tony was as a passer and a quarterback for the Cowboys for more than a decade, and they look at Dak and they don't see the same type of player, they don't see the same efficiency, and they remember how he finished the season, which was without Tyron Smith and without Ezekiel Elliott for a good portion of the second half of the season. and they forget that he's really been pretty good for a year and a half and not good when he was playing those 6 or 8 games without those 2 players.
Well, I think, and probably we're probably being hard on Dak, even on those last 6 or 8 games. I think Dak's going to be an amazing quarterback in this league. And, everybody gets it done different. Roger Staubach got it done differently than Troy. Troy got it done differently than Romo. And obviously Dak's going to get it done differently probably than all the above. And but I do think he's a unique player for us. I think he's got unique skills. I think he's a unique leader. I think he's got the it factor. I think he's an incredible athlete at the quarterback position, and I think he's a really good passer of the football, and I think we'll only get better as time goes. We've got to remember this is his second year, or going into his third year. He's had 2 good years behind him. And, if you look at what he's done in his first 2 years, it stacks up with just about any young quarterback coming in the league. And so I just think, it's all in front of Dak. Although he's had a great 2 years, I think he's only going to get better. I see him out there every day. He's more driven than ever. He's working harder. He's in great shape. He's certainly, being the leader he needs to be with working with our players. And certainly as we get closer to more of the organized things as we move toward May and June, where we can have the organized practices, the OTAs, and the mini camps. I know he's going to be prepared, and I just think we've got a really good football team. You are what you are. We did miss the playoffs last year. We were 9-7, not good enough for I think the team that we have, and I think we'll improve not only with the free agency moves that we've made, but the draft, and then of course I think we'll have our team intact. I think Zeke will be focused. We won't have those type of things hanging over our head, and we're ready to go play football and and improve on last year and get to where we think we should be, which is competing for a world championship.
I was going to say, assuming Zeke proves trustworthy after the experience he just had of missing 6 games suspended, how much peace of mind and confidence do you have going into this season compared to last year, when last year you kind of knew at some point you might lose the guy who arguably your whole offense is built around? You don't have that fear this year, at least not at this point. How different does that make things?
Well, it's certainly nice. Now, we don't want to make excuses. People are going to have challenges. Every team has a challenge, when you're in a season. I mean, you look at the Eagles, what an amazing job they did of overcoming a major injury at the quarterback position, which rarely happens, and going on to still win a Super Bowl. They had a great football team this year, but they also overcame some adversity. And, we have to continue to be better at that. That hadn't been our strong point, the last 4 or 5 years. We've had, seasons when we do really well, and then we have some adversity and we don't quite respond as well as we hope we would. I know Jason expects better. I know our top leaders and our players on our team expect more. Obviously, Jerry and I expect more in terms of being able to, overcome adversity when it happens, because it's going to happen. I mean, it happens to everybody in the NFL. You're going to have injuries, you're going to have disappointments, and you have to overcome those. And hopefully you put a team that's, you structure a team in a way with the depth that you can overcome that.
So to you, playing as many games you did without Sean Lee, as many games you did without Tyron Smith, as many games you did without Ezekiel Elliott is not an excuse for finishing 9-7 and missing playoffs.
It's not an excuse. I mean, that just happens in our league, and people have it. Would you prefer not to have it? And obviously things probably do go better when it doesn't happen. But I think, if you really want to be a championship caliber football team, that competes year in and year out in the playoffs, which I think this team can be with Dak's leadership, with our offensive line that we have, with Zeke, with some of the pieces we have in place, this team should be able to be a perennial playoff team and be able to compete for championships. But we hadn't taken that step yet, obviously, because we hadn't done that yet. We were 9-7 and out last year, so we've got to take the next step, and then, let's see where this takes us. But consistency is obviously something that's been missing with this particular team.
And now's the time when you've got your quarterback and your running back playing on, minimal contracts.
Absolutely.
Because they're on their first contract. It becomes much more difficult from your point of view to put the right kind of team together when you're paying a quarterback huge money and a running back huge money.
It'll get harder for sure as we go when we have to start paying them again. Now, this is really the first year we've had a clean cap at the quarterback position. We were still paying on the books Tony last year.
$9 million.
And so it wasn't like we were just free of charge. No, it wasn't the 20 and 25 a lot of teams are saddled with.
You got to quit paying these sportscasters on your cap.
Certainly we will be too soon with Dak. I just have a great feeling that he's going to have an amazing year, and it's going to be his turn to step up and get paid, and that'll be great.
Stephen, thanks for the insights. Appreciate your time as always.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Ed.
Thanks, bud.
And there it was, boys, nearly 20 minutes of solid audio there from Ed Werder at Orlando. Ed, did you, when you got Stephen off to the side like that, did anybody bother you, or were you kind of in a secretive little enclave where you were able to stay out of eyesight? Because I did notice, I don't know if you see that video, Deadspin and everybody had it, with Ian Rappaport was trying to do a live report. He was doing a live report, and a gentleman walked behind him and started making some signals, and it was a very interesting. You've had that happen to you in the past. I remember after a particularly interesting episode between you and the Cowboys in a report you had years ago, a man
Terrell
out of
Owens
Valley
and being a
Ranch.
toxic factor in the locker room.
Correct. Right? A man decided to show up and start trying to holler and shout during
he
your
shouted
stand-ups.
terrible things at me, calling me a yellow journalist and
Correct.
urging me to reveal my sources, one of which I disagreed with and the other which I didn't take his advice on.
Now, what were his false allegations?
And then he did it again at the game that weekend, and we had him removed, so he didn't get to see the game.
He had to get him out of the stadium.
But they lost the game, so maybe he was better off for it.
All right, let's unpack. Not a lot of folks obviously got that kind of one-on-one time with Steven, so let's take a peek. And by the way, we always appreciate it. I want to give them a shout-out. Dallas Morning News, longtime employer of yours, an employer of mine. I still do some writing for them. Going to play up this podcast like they tend to do, and we always appreciate that. They get the word out there for us, and we like to have that outlet. One of the things that came up was, I thought it was really interesting. It was sort of subtle, but Stephen, in answering one of your questions, brought up on his own. You didn't bring up, it wasn't one of you asked a lot of.
Make any comparisons.
No.
Yeah.
And Troy Aikman's name came up, and also Romo's name came up, and Stephen alluded to the fact that he believes Dak is more like Troy Aikman. Expand on that a little bit, Ed, because I thought that was a really interesting point that he made, and I think it sort of speaks to, hey, there are some things we can't really expect Dak to do, and I think it also speaks to this current wide receiving core.
Right. My big takeaway in that part of the interview, when he mentions that he thinks Dak is more comparable to Troy Aikman, that's a little surprising because obviously Troy was a classic drop back, throw it on time, very accurate with the football type of quarterback, and Dak came, from an option type of offense and wasn't even under center in college, and he's learned that. But what he's saying is Dak Prescott wants to be a drop-back passer, and that's the kind of quarterback they see him being. The problem has been, as we saw last year with the disappointing performance in the passing game, and even Jason Garrett admitted yesterday that's an area where they have to get back to being great, that they've been a great passing team most of the last 10 years, and they need to be that again. And saying that, I think he laid a lot of the problems in the passing game at the feet and inconsistent hands of the wide receivers. He said that Dak is a guy who, to be accurate, needs receivers to run routes properly, to be where they're supposed to be when they're supposed to be there so the ball can be given to them in time, and that has not happened. And we've seen them back that up by going out and signing Allen Hurns in free agency. He is a receiver who is similar to Dez. Now, we all know that Dez's spot on this roster for the first time in his Cowboys career is not guaranteed by any measure. And we also know that one of his great faults is he is not regarded as a good route runner. In fact, quarterbacks who have watched his tape and scrutinized it carefully will call him a lazy route runner. And now we see for the first time Dez Bryant in an offseason is spending time with a coach for the specific purpose of becoming a better route runner. And so now we know what exactly it is the Cowboys see as a potential fatal flaw in the pairing of Dak Prescott and Dez Bryant.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you had this conversation with Steven at a time when Steven there's been some good cop, bad cop going on with the Jones boys, and I'm talking, of course, about Jerry and Steven. Steven has been the bad cop. I think Jerry has always kind of enjoyed being the likable, zany character that he can be. He can be tough. He's been a bad cop when it comes to the NFL and some of that. But with Dez, I think Jerry has tried to sound less aggressive. Steven, throughout this offseason, has been the one basically without any prompting, talked about some of the things that Dez does on the sidelines, which can
calling him a distraction.
Yes, which can certainly be a distraction. And again, that to a lot of journalists and a lot of media, the whole sideline thing, that wasn't even something that's really, it comes up every now and then, but it wasn't even that big of a story. It was really interesting that Steven sort of made that a story.
Well, because they had defended him in far
Correct.
Sideline sideline situations
than what we saw this past year.
Right.
I thought it was interesting. I think Steven, during this owners' meetings, tamped it down a little bit. I thought with you in this interview, he was quick to say, as Jerry also backed up in his conversation with the reporters, that, listen, the Hearns and the Thompson signings have very little, if anything, to do. I think one of the words they had used over the past few days was it was irrelevant in comparison to what's going to happen or in relation to Dez's signing or his release. I think what Steven has done, Ed, is lay the groundwork or help lay the groundwork for this conversation that Jerry has now come out and said will take place. Probably, he said it'd be good for his schedule. We'll see about Dez's schedule next Thursday or Friday. And there'll be a sit-down, and they will talk about this. And I think the Cowboys have tried to set this thing up with, and Ed, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if there's teams out there waiting to give a 29-year-old Dez Bryant, who's coming off really 3 seasons that aren't that spectacular, like a huge deal. So in some ways, it goes back and forth sometimes, who has the most leverage. It certainly feels like to me the Cowboys have the leverage right now to a certain extent. And I have a hard time seeing Dez being able to say, no, I'm going to stick with the $12 million I'm supposed to make next year. I think it probably, if he is to be with the Cowboys, he'll be playing somewhere in the $8 or $9 million for next year. Is that about the pay cut you think will end up happening? What were you hearing out there?
Well, I think what's happened in free agency helps the Dez Bryant cause. We've seen receivers be paid tremendous amounts of money who have never at any point in their careers with any degree of consistency put up the kind of numbers Dez did early in his career, right? Sammy Watkins is getting $14 million a year from the Chiefs, and the Cowboys had interest in Sammy
Certainly.
Watkins. And if
much
they had
younger
signed him,
option, we should say.
we believe that Dez Bryant would have been cut on the spot had they been
That
able.
is what that's what it looks like.
But even the signing of Alan Hearns creates leverage for the Cowboys because now they have somebody who's a viable replacement. I mean, in Jacksonville, he was the ex-receiver. That's the position that Dez occupies. And so I think what happens now is the Cowboys are going to have what they hope is an amicable discussion with Dez about reducing his contract. And this is one the Cowboys would not be having unless they're prepared to move on should he refuse to cooperate. I mean, you don't go in and say, hey, we want to cut your pay. How about you play for X? You have to go in and say, you're either playing for X based on what you've done or you're not here. And then Dez has to go into that meeting knowing how much less, if any, is he willing to take and what's his market value with somebody else. Now, the thing that may be a little bit intriguing for him in this, as I said, the Watkins deal sort of justifies his position for the $16 million he's owed this year, $16.5 million, I think. Watkins getting $14 million. But now we see discussions about Odell Beckham Jr. wanting $20 million, discontent with the Giants about his behavior, his general antics, his lack of professionalism, that they don't want to tolerate anymore, and this outrageous contract demand. But maybe he gets traded before this meeting, and that would create new parameters for the value of Des Bryant. But I think the Cowboys in no way have the conversation without being prepared, if they don't get what they want, to move on.
Yeah, I think you're right. And just to, I don't often provide context, but just in terms of clarity, Ed, I believe he's set, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think Des is set to count $16 million against the cap this year, would actually make somewhere a little over $12 million in salary for people that are trying to track this and wonder what it would do. Now, the Cowboys are the kings of restructuring things. I believe they just did that with Jason Witten. Ed, did you get any sense of if they're restructuring his contract, didn't that mean that Jason Witten's unlikely to land the broadcasting gig and will continue to play with the Dallas Cowboys? Did you? I would think that would be the case, and I do find it interesting that. And I hope, I mean, Jason may be great. I don't know. I love Jason. He's been good to us. We're both friends with the guy. Aren't you sensing right now that Romo, though, was so great, or at least the perception is that he was a runaway success because of all his enthusiasm and everything that happened, that there's almost now a run on Cowboys?
Well, there always has been.
Let's get – I know, but I'm just saying this is good timing. If Witten wanted this would be – perfect timing to go do this.
If he were like Romo from the standpoint of, he's had a lot of injuries. Geez, I just can't stay healthy anymore. Broadcasting is what I always wanted to do after my career was over. And geez, now I've got this really unique opportunity like Romo did to go be the number one analyst for CBS. Jason Witten, apparently now that Peyton Manning has turned down $10 million a year to do 11 games, is apparently among those next in line, or at least, they want to try him out. And I think he could be very good at this. But I just don't, sense that Jason is ready to give up the game yet. I think he's singularly focused on playing to the point that he hasn't even thought about what's after football for him. And I'm not sure.
I disagree with that, because I think that Tennessee, that whole thing, the rumors that could they have approached Jason Witten, and now the broadcasting. I think when you get to that age and you've had the injuries he has, and you read everything out there on what this can do to you down the road, how could you not ponder during the off season when you're at Watercolor, when you're down there by Seaside, where he and Romo like to vacation, and also
what are they doing there?
Your buddy
football.
Sean
They're
Payton.
playing football with Sean Payton down there.
Oh,
that's what they were doing. I saw
one
video
time they did. They went on the beach. They don't play football all the time.
And I think you're right, and I'm going to agree with you on the point you made, which is when it is over for him. I mean, assuming it ever is. They can't get him off the field for a single play right now, much less the entire season. But I think when it's over for him, I'm not sure he ever thought broadcasting was for sure the direction he wanted to go, that he was more inclined to go be a coach or, be involved in the game in that way. So I'm not sure this would give him, it's not as alluring to him as it would be to somebody who always wanted to go be a broadcaster at the highest possible level immediately. So it'll surprise me if Witten leaves football this year. I think he's going to play this season.
That's a good thought on the coaching. His grandfather was a coach, and so came from a coaching family, and that might be in his blood. Now, Ed, I want to continue to get inside your brain after you've come back from Orlando, and it can be a scary place inside that brain, but it also lots of information that you have up there. We'll get to some of these rule changes and some of the ongoing rule changes as they can't seem to figure out some of this. What did you take from the breakfast where you sit down, and I've been to these things. You get to 7 a.m. The coach is sitting there, and now Belichick sometimes would show up to these owners' meetings. Sometimes he wouldn't. I would assume he was there. It was Belichick making his way around doing his thing. Yes. They have an AFC breakfast, and then they'll have a NFC breakfast. Now
they used to this, but what happened is the meetings keep getting shorter and shorter. And the coach's breakfast for one conference would be on Tuesday and the other would be on Wednesday, and it's gotten now to the point that
just combined
on
everybody.
Tuesday afternoons most of the business has generally been done, and the owners want to get everybody in their traveling party together and get on their private planes and go home, and the coaches have this obligation on Wednesday morning. And so even last year, Jason Garrett was among those who went ahead and did his improv a 4:00 p.m. start time for his access to honor that, and then he left the day early. And so this year, what they did is they had all 32 guys available the same day. So we actually wind up getting half as much access to the head coaches, which that also does not bother them.
I bet not. Now, your time with Garrett, first of all, just as it pertains to Des Bryant, since that's an ongoing discussion. And by the way, Ed, while you were there, news broke that Terrence Williams, Cowboys' number 2 wide receiver, had an undisclosed injury. Apparently,
you know who disclosed it? Stephen, by accident. He wasn't aware that it hadn't been out there yet.
Oh, gosh. Okay.
And, he accidentally leaked that on himself.
Well, a month ago, he had surgery for a broken foot, and will hopefully be ready by training camp. But that's also, as they continue to bring wide receivers, you got to kind of put that into the equation. Did you get the sense from talking to Jason, like, is he sticking up for Dez? You know how Dez sometimes is going to be looking to see, okay, who's on my behalf? Who's weighing in on my behalf? Alan Hearns was smart enough to sign him. He immediately said, Dez is 88. Dez is going to be here. Alan Hearns knows what he's doing. That was very positive PR. I also love what Alan Hearns did with his number 17, because of the 17 deaths and victims at the Parkland High School in Florida. But on Dez, where do you think Jason is coming in?
So everybody's posturing, right? We already mentioned the roles that Jerry and Steven have taken, one good cop, one bad cop. Well, Jason's in a different position. Jason's not going to let the money part of it be an issue for him publicly, and he's got to be prepared to deal with the player. He's got to take the approach that I'm going to have Dez on my football team in all likelihood this year, and my speech is going to publicly represent that. And so all he talked about was how much Dez loves football, how much Dez wants to be great, and Dez wants his team to be great. And I think Jason probably believes that, and I'm sure he wants Dez Bryant on his football team. I'm sure he wants a better player than he had last year named Dez Bryant. But I would think Jason would want him on the football team, and isn't going to let the money part of it be part of the equation as it relates to him. So everything he said was very positive about Dez. He claimed not to know anything about his off-season program because they don't have contact with the players this time of year, so he doesn't know anything about Dez going out and emphasizing improving his route running and being able to run more, of the routes in the tree than he does right now.
I like that one report that the NFL Network appeared to have, saying something about Dez was going to be working on the route tree. I think I didn't really do Dez any favors, but we'll see what he works on. Ed, not mentioned when you talked about where Jason stands, there's some speculation out there, and we've had Scott Linehan on this show. There's some speculation that perhaps Linehan is one of the guys maybe that has seen Dez as a distraction at times, maybe thinks he's distracted Dak. And then I'm also very interested, there's somebody I'm going to bring to the show, Ed, and I know that might be a shock to you and Frito, but Sanjay Lau, the new this guy played for the Huskies back in the day, the national champion Huskies in like 1992, I believe. Sanjay Lau, new Cowboys wide receivers coach. Ed, as you kind of checked around with Steven and others, did you get a sense for like what's going on with the staff right now? They lost a linebackers coach, Eberflus, who you really liked a lot. He got a D coordinator job, and they just kind of switched with the Bengals to get Paul Alexander as their offensive line coach. Did this coaching staff upgrade, or did it just sort of, were there a bunch of lateral moves? What's going on with this coaching staff?
Well, I thought the most interesting move of all was obviously Jason Garrett's quarterback coach has always been Wade Wilson while he's been here, and Wade Wilson was allowed to leave or advised to leave or fired, whichever it may be, and replaced by Kellen Moore, the backup quarterback we all know has a very close relationship to Scott Linehan, and would seemingly be more loyal to him than he would be to the head coach. But Jason didn't express, nor would I expect him to, any alarm over the coaching changes that took place. But I think he recognizes and we heard Stephen basically say it today in the interview that we just played. I think Jason recognizes Stephen and Jerry have basically eliminated all of the excuses. They cited the Eagles overcoming the loss of their starting quarterback to win the Super Bowl, and I think they've made it very clear that as much as they've supported Jason Garrett, he goes into this season having exhausted his benefit of the doubt collateral with the Jones family. And I think some of the coaching changes reflect that as well, that Jason has been put on notice. At the same time, he's been allowed to keep both of his coordinators, and he remains the head coach despite a very disappointing season. And I think you hear from Stephen Jones right now saying there'll be no more of this. We should be a consistent winner with the talent that we have, and we are going to either be that with Jason Garrett or we're going to be it with somebody else.
You heard him say it to you, Ed, when you asked him about that 9-7 season, and they had some adversity. And I thought that was a very interesting point that Stephen made was, hey, we don't particularly seem to be that good at that. That's not a strength of ours. Right. A strong point, I believe, is exactly what he said. And, over the years, we've talked about the Jones boys being pretty rosy with a lot of their comments and all. I thought that was kind of, it was a little bit ominous and kind of right on the nose.
Right, dose of reality.
A little bit of a dose of reality. Now, Ed, as we... our listeners on the Doomsday, and we appreciate all of you guys. We're very excited to be back with you. Does it make any of our listeners or any Cowboys fans anywhere, and I think all Cowboys fans listen to this podcast, iTunes, all the different ways you can get it, Stitcher. Do you think this Dez catch just kind of rubs salt in the wound, the fact that we can officially now, with what the league did with the new catch rule, say that that's absolutely a catch? And the fact that, I don't know if we're giving this thing a name, but it'll certainly be the Dez Bryant rule if we were going to give it a name. Do you think the Cowboys fans are pretty bittersweet about this one?
I would assume that they're going to long regret that the definition of a catch 3 years ago isn't what it is today. But there's no question that the three plays that led the NFL to make the rule change and take the element of going to the ground and controlling the ball out of the definition of a catch were first the Dez Bryant play, the Calvin Johnson touchdown in Detroit, and the Jesse James play in Pittsburgh at the goal line last year in the playoffs against the Patriots that would have won that game. Those would all be catches as defined by the rule today. I'm sure people will be no less exercised about the fact that should have been a catch. But as Stephen noted, we still were going to have to stop Aaron Rodgers one more time, and we've not been able to do that in any other game we played against Aaron Rodgers, no matter how much time was left on the clock. Yeah. And so there's no assurance that even had that been a catch, that the Cowboys would have won that game. But there's no question they had a much better chance of winning that game and advancing further into the playoffs to the NFC Championship game had that been a catch and a touchdown or the ball on the 1 yard line.
It should have been changed after the Calvin Johnson touchdown from even before Dez. I mean, that was such an obvious thing. But at least the rule now is, much like another definition, if it looks like something, then it likely is a catch, And I think that's finally now, as fans of the game and as we cover the game, when you see something that absolutely looks like a catch, it probably is a catch. And I just think that's an easier way to move forward. Ed, some controversy as we tape this on, what is today, Wednesday? There's some news coming out of the NFL even this very morning, this very day, about, and I know they talked about this while you were at the owners' meetings, what's going on with the lowering of the helmet rule?
Well, obviously we saw with Ryan Shazier injury, the spinal injury that the Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker suffered, and hasn't regained full use of all of his extremities even at this point. His career is certainly in question. But the league wants to try, and because of the concussion lawsuit, the league is trying to protect itself and protect the players from themselves, really, in many cases. Because this is the NFL now, as it's played in this modern age, there is no tackling or very little tackling in football. It's just hitting. That's all it is. And too often, the element used to strike the opposing player is a helmet, and that jeopardizes the brain, the head, the neck, and way too many things. And the NFL is very conscious of the concern publicly about that, about their public liability in that regard. And so they've tried to pass a measure unexpectedly on the final day of the meeting. They came up with a rule now that it is a foul. This is a quote. It is a foul if a player lowers his head to initiate and make contact with his helmet against an opponent. The player may be disqualified. The player could be ejected for this, not just a 15-yard penalty. Applies to any player anywhere on the field. Could be away from the play. Could be a running back lowering his head to get extra yardage. The player may be disqualified. Well, there's been outrage about it because if applied as that's worded, if it's enforced that way, which nobody could imagine football could even be played if that's enforced the way it's written, then like an NFL defensive starter told me today, a star player said, it could be called on every single tackle, even the best form tackle. You lower your head and it goes first so that you get your shoulder in position to make contact. You cannot shoulder tackle without lowering your head. Yes, they never enforce rules like this against the offense, and it will mostly affect defensive players. So your only choice is to let them score. That's what it's coming down to. Let them score or get kicked out. And so now the reaction of the NFL, of course, has been Commissioner Roger Goodell at the end of the meetings today cautioned everybody not to overreact, that this is some legislation that is still in the works. It's not been finalized, so they're still working on the appropriate wording. I think it's going to have to change pretty dramatically for it not to significantly affect football. I mean, Rich McKay, you mentioned, he's the head of the competition committee. He said, well, this rule would have applied to only about 4 or 5 plays in a game. Would have only been that many players ejected for this violation. Well, like you're hearing from this NFL defensive star, that's not entirely true if the officials enforce it as it's worded.
Fascinating in those comments from the player. Very interesting to hear. Ed, I do have a concern if a rules committee, and again, I know they have the best of intentions most of the time to try to make things easier for the fans and to keep players healthy and try to, I mean, for years, I don't think that was enough of a priority, but they're trying to perhaps now. Why are these guys, like Rich McKay, who you just mentioned, that's the competition committee, as long as I can remember, he and your best buddy Polian have been a part of that thing, but why has he been granted, like, if they continually have all these issues with rules, like, why don't they ever, like, change who's on that committee? Well, and I know people rotate in and out, but that McKay guy has been given, like, a lifetime membership.
He's the chairman of the competition committee.
I mean,
and he's a former general manager of the Bucs and the Falcons.
That.
And
throw him out.
What's funny about what you're saying is he got suspended for violating the rules himself in Atlanta, right, for the crowd noise. So it's a little hypocrisy involved, I guess.
I think so.
I think Rich is just that highly regarded. They do change out the committee members, and Steven's been on there for I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years now. Sean Payton's on there, so there's a couple of coaches on there, and I think it's well intentioned. I mean, like you said, they're trying to create rules that will make the game better and safer. But in this one particular rule lowering the helmet thing we're talking about now, I think if they weren't really finished with it and didn't have it in its final form, then probably should have made sure it didn't become public.
I think so. But far be it for this commissioner to ever have anything happen.
You're going to blame Roger Goodell for this?
Yeah.
He's not on the committee.
I don't care. I mean, he oversees everything, and he's the one who he's the public face. Yeah. No, now we got a Michael Bennett. Let's get that investigation
I saw him
going.
In handcuffs.
Can't wait till the NFL's able to botch that investigation.
Hey, you know what? Unlike, speaking of those two, Michael Bennett and Roger Goodell, unlike the incident that happened in Las Vegas, alleged incident, he was not backed by the NFL immediately, publicly, like he was in that situation.
Yeah, that happened. I did have to. I was a little amused. I did think that the Houston PD. And they did take their time on that investigation, and I like it at the news conference, which their police chief, Art Acevedo, has been roundly criticized, but he at some point said, well, we got a lot of shootings and stabbings we had to prioritize. So basically, like, that's
bigger than jocks and socks.
I guess, but he also, at the same time, he was talking about
equivalent of that.
He was like, it was a paraplegic woman, and he's like, it's a little old lady, and he called him morally bankrupt
yeah.
I believe. And but at the same time, he might be morally bankrupt, but we're going to need to wait about a year because we got a bunch of other stuff happening. Oh, by the way, we had this flood hit. That was pretty rough on the city, too.
And apparently there's no video, despite all of the cameras and, all of the scanning in and out. Every time you go on the field or off the field, you have to scan in and out with your credential.
We need to be more like the Brits in that instance. Do you ever watch British TV? Do you watch anything off BBC? Like they have that, and Frito, weigh in if you know what I'm talking about. They have something called like CCTV, and it's just there's nothing that can escape video. Like there's nothing on the streets. Like in this modern day, like Jack the Ripper, they would have been able to catch him. I mean, because there's just I don't think they had video capability at that point, but there's CCTV everywhere, and I just don't think America we have enough video.
Is Al Riveron watching? Dean
Tell
Blandino,
people
Mike
who
Pereira.
Al Riveron is the new Dean Blandino, and which means in about 2 years he'll be on your TV or whatever network he'll graduate into. But Al Riveron so far not doing much for me. Can I just say that? I want to give him a chance, but Al Riveron, I don't know.
I hope none of this compromises my opportunity to get an NFL credential for the owners' meetings next year.
You've got no chance now that you've been a part of this. Ed, any last point you want to make? It's so good. I mean, I feel like we picked up right where we left off. It's not even like we had a hiatus. And here's the deal. We're willing to come back just pretty much every week, especially kind of through the draft and react to
Which
the draft.
is going to be here.
If,
as you mentioned, we have an invitation to be in a suite.
yes, if we have enough listeners, that's the deal I'm making. If
What's enough?
The threshold, I don't know. I don't like getting into numbers that much, but I would say 10,000 downloads on our first trip back here. If that happens, and if you tell a friend about this out there, I'll be right back in the same spot next Wednesday.
What about me?
With Ed, hopefully. I don't know where. Ed, you travel
I'm
around.
going to go check out the suite.
There's no telling where you will be by then. I want to thank everybody, though. It's been exciting and it's fun to be back. And, Ed, thank you for going to Orlando and digging up that great stuff. Thank you to the Morning News for always looking out for us and getting the word out there. Shireen Williams, an old buddy of ours. Boy, she's not that old. I like what she does. She puts all her stuff on Pro Football Talk. That's
all of it?
always,
I would say all of it. I think that's
Ed, let's give her
exaggeration.
She certainly is a backer, and we appreciate
love
that.
Shireen.
Ed, anything else you want to add?
Jeez, you already asked me that, and I added stuff I didn't plan to say before. Now what am I supposed to say? I'm just really out now.
Don't really recall you adding much. No, good stuff, Ed. Perfect. Thank you to Frito Nation Productions for Ed Werder. I'm Matt Mosley. Good night, everybody.
We'll see you 10,000 people next week.
It's one thing falling in love with a house, picturing yourself moving in and calling it home, and quite another navigating the world of price negotiating, mortgage lenders, and finding the budget that works best for you. An agent who's a Realtor can make understanding that world easier. Realtors have the expertise, access to proprietary data, and tools to help you get from imagining living somewhere to actually doing it. That's the kind of help we can provide. Because that's who we are. Realtors are members of the National Association of Realtors.
Hey, it's Mark Goodman.
And I'm Alan Light.
On today's podcast, Record Store Day founder Carrie Colleton is joining us to discuss the April 20th RSD special releases.
Plus, we'll talk live with our audience, the Sound Up Pod Squad, and find out who still listens to vinyl. And some updates from the Beatles universe.
Oh, good. Sound Up with Mark Goodman and Alan Light, the only music podcast that matters. Get it on Pandora, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.